So now we have Canada, a relatively benign country, under assault by Muslim terrorists. This is obviously unsettling, especially to people who do not want Islamic terrorism to be a topic of conversation. We all know President Obama has gone out of his way in the past to de-emphasize jihadist activity. Right now, the USA and the world is doing the bare minimum against ISIS when the world should be crushing that barbaric group. Also, the good Muslim controversy continues to rage. Actor Ben Affleck epitomized that when he became offended that verbal bomb thrower Bill Maher was condemning Muslims in general. In the liberal community, there is sympathy for good Muslims. But right now, we need some perspective. Every sane person knows not all believers of Islam are violent people. I've been to many Muslim countries, never had a problem. However, there are millions of Muslims who believe that harming non-Muslims is acceptable behavior, and many of those people will commit violence themselves. That's a lot of folks. And Muslim terrorism is now the world's #1 problem.
He's incredibly reductive for very complex, very nuanced questions, to the point where he makes it absurd. When you make such a broad statement like that, it's the #1 problem in the world. Well, Bill, by what criteria, by what metric, how did you come to that conclusion? Can you give us specifics? Can you give us details? You can't just go out there and say that. That's not how it works. And it is an empirical question. So, for example, if you go by maybe body count, it wouldn't be that Muslim terrorism is the #1 problem in the world. In fact, there are plenty of things that are in the running. #1 might be North Korea. It's a state, it's a country where everybody's starving to death because there's an insane lunatic running the place. We have Pakistan and India both have nuclear weapons. They're pointed at each other, and they've been beefing forever. We have climate change, which is bringing drought and famine and all this horrible stuff, and he doesn't give that any credibility whatsoever. We have fighting right now in the Congo between Muslims and Christians, where they're both slaughtering civilians on either side. And Vladimir Putin, that's another example. He just fucking waltzed into Ukraine and annexed Crimea. And he's also now flirting with doing that with Estonia. There was a story the other day about how Russian planes went over into Estonian airspace. They're probably testing the waters to see if they would be able to get away with another land grab in there. So there are many problems. You can't just say that. And also, U.S. imperialism has toppled more governments, supported more dictators, killed many more people than any Muslim terrorism has. So he's just wrong if you use any numerical criteria. See, the problem is Bill O'Reilly is just obsessed with the image of Muslim terrorism. And in his mind, intentions are everything. So in the U.S., if they act like and they say, well, we have good intentions, we mean to help people, etc., then Bill O'Reilly gives Iraq, for example, a total pass. He says, 200,000 at least civilians died in Iraq. Well, they get a pass because we get a pass because we meant well. Oh, really? Is that comforting to the mother who's still crying over the loss of her son during the war? How about the millions of displaced Iraqis? Is that comfort to them that it's okay, we meant well, even though we fucked up your country, toppled the government, and now stirred up Sunni Shia fighting? No, we don't get a pass just because you think we mean well. And oftentimes, by the way, we don't mean well. Because oftentimes we're trying to get natural resources. Oftentimes there's some nefarious motive. I mean, if you look at the history of U.S. interventions post-World War II, a lot of it is going to South America, for example, and toppling democratic governments and putting in dictators because those dictators will give our corporations carte blanche. So this idea that we're always fighting for democracy and freedom and for the best around the world for the best circumstances, wrong. I mean, we're in Afghanistan right now probably for opium, probably for minerals. We have this facade that it's just about stopping the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but at least as far as Al-Qaeda goes, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan right now. So it's not just about that. There's geopolitical strategic moves going on. The U.S. wants control of vital regions for oil purposes, for other purposes. I mean, the idea that it's purely humanitarian in nature is silly. I mean, even if you go, let's go just by death count. If you go just by that, the U.S. destroys Muslim terrorism on Vietnam alone. On Vietnam alone, millions of civilians dead. We used Agent Orange and napalm on villages. We firebombed. I mean, the number of civilians we did not give a flying fuck about as we marauded our way across the country, it's insanity. But again, Bill O'Reilly, he believes in this worldview of good guys, bad guys. You know, black and white. Evil, just. And it's like, that's not the way the world works. It's so much more complex than that. And to just say something, well, you know, it's got to be the Muslims. That's the problem. That's the biggest threat. Let me ask you a question. How many Muslim terrorist attacks do you think happened in the U.S.? Or actually, a better question, how many people died from Muslim terrorism in the U.S. since September 11th, 2001? Less than 50. Now let me ask you another question. How many people died just from gun violence in the U.S. from September 11, 2001 till today? I hope you're sitting down. 390,000 people. 50 or less people died from Muslim terrorism in the U.S. from 9/11 until today. 390,000 people died in the U.S. just from gun violence. That includes murders, suicides, accidents, you name it. Everything. So if Bill O'Reilly is really being objective according to the numbers, well, then he would be going on a very strong anti-gun rant right now. He'd be going on a gun reform rant. We need to do universal background checks, no more gun show loophole, got to ban high-capacity magazines, got to limit the number of guns an individual can buy unless they get a license, etc., etc. But no, he's not going to do that. Why? Because he's not viewing the situation objectively. He's not taking the emotion out of it and going purely by the data.